we are talking about the future. We're going to talk about an inclusive future for India. So much of the conversation over yesterday and today has been about the growth of India, the rise of the Indian economy. But all of this is meaningless unless growth is inclusive, unless growth is equitable. And my panel here today is going to discuss exactly that, what the roadmap ahead looks like in terms of being able to bridge some of the major inequalities that we continue to see in the country, whether we talk about the gaps in healthcare, we talk about the gaps in education. All of those are gaps that require innovative solutions, innovative thinking. Is there a road for private capital and for private enterprise to bridge some of these inequities? Let's just put some numbers on the table before I get my panel to comment. And Neera Nundy is here representing Dasra. Dasra has just put out a report, as it does every year, to talk about what is happening with corporate social responsibility spends. Remember, it is mandatory for companies to allocate 2% of their profit towards corporate social responsibility. So Dasra tracks what's happening on that front and also tracks what's happening as far as the use of philanthropic capital is concerned. But the bulk of the spending on the social sector continues to be done by the government. So if you take a look at the data, approximately 23 lakh crores, that's about 8.3% of GDP, is what the government is spending as far as the social sector is concerned, but it is still well below the asking rate. The Niti Aayog believes that the gap still is almost 5% between where we need to be and where we are today in terms of social sector spending. So what role can the private sector play? Neera, let me come to you with that. You've just put out the Dasra report, and while there has been progress, both in terms of being able to raise philanthropic capital as well as CSR spending, FY23, the number stands at what? CSR 23,000 crores. What more needs to be done? What's the positive change that we've seen, but what do you believe needs to be done going forward?
So probably we need to do a lot more. If you really look at India, culturally we give a lot, but there isn't much infrastructure to support that giving. So CSR, yes, gives a lot, but what our report also talks about is how powerful family philanthropy is, retail philanthropy is, and in fact that giving can take a lot more risk and can be more innovative. So a big part of what we've been trying to do is, can you take some of that innovation and link it with government systems, because as you rightly said, they're one of the biggest, deepest pockets, and if you can't work through government systems like health and education, a majority of the population isn't going to reach there. So what we saw this year was that more CSR giving, that increase came from companies actually meeting the mandate rather than there actually being growth. But in family philanthropy, interestingly enough, it was the affluent givers, so professionals, folks who have jobs, who are giving far more of their net worth than even the ultra-high net worth.
And first-generation wealth creators doing more of the giving.
Yes, and they're giving a lot more. Well, they have liquidity events, right? So once these liquidity events happen, we call them the now generation. So the now givers are putting quite a lot of money, like the Kamath brothers, Rain Matter, putting into, or even having Ashish here, really putting money into foundations in climate and other kinds of issues that aren't always the traditional health, but more at an intersection. So you're seeing these now generation givers, you're seeing intergenerational, kind of like the panel we had before, next generation is actually wanting to do a lot more in philanthropy and thinking about how they can be more strategic. And I think what's very exciting, and you'll agree with me, Shireen, is that we're seeing women-led philanthropy actually really move the needle, and if we can really get women to do more and be more of the decision makers. So they don't necessarily create the wealth as much, but they're actually leaning into doing that philanthropy. And our Giving Pie network, which has about 300 families now, collectively giving 1,000 crores to India, 70% of these families are actually women-led, as in they're the ones engaged in the philanthropy.
So if I were to ask you, Neera, for one thing that you believe we need to prioritize, both from a private sector perspective, but also from the government's perspective, to create a much more enabling, facilitative environment to encourage more giving.
I think we have to have some incentives, right? So I think...
Incentives to give more?
Yeah, like tax incentives. I think it can help. And I think, you know, we need to be able to do that, and we need to have more visibility and transparency. So if the government can mandate and we know where giving is going, then we're able to enable that. So I think just having more players and strengthening that ecosystem, I think, will really help.
Okay, Ashish, I want to come to you now. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add a small thing on the giving. I think the incentive that would really help is being able to contribute shares. Because often people take their company public. If you donate shares to a foundation or a charity, it has to be liquidated within a year. So I would advocate that, maybe give 5 years for a longer period of time. That will then enable people to sort of tax-free give their equity, which is the way it happens.
Does anyone really want to part with equity for foundational purposes or for giving purposes, Ashish?
No, you'd rather, I think it's easier sometimes to give away small amounts of equity than to give away
Money?
cash.
Yeah.
That's easier, notionally. And two is, if you're getting it pre-tax, giving away your equity before it crystallizes into a capital gain, that makes it easier.
Yeah, so that's one idea that you've put on the table to create a more facilitative environment to encourage giving. But since you did pick up the mic, let me continue that conversation with you, Ashish. And I want to talk about one of the big spaces that requires innovative solutions, innovative thinking, and a lot of capital from the private sector as well. A space that you're deeply involved and engaged with, education. What more do you believe needs to be done, not just at the level of primary education, but more so at the level of higher education, creating universities that people have access to, affordable educational facilities that people have access to? How do we create more Ashoka universities for the country?
So Ashoka is a non-profit, and I can talk about that model later. But I think if we really want quality universities to grow, I think first thing is, I would say let's advocate to allow for-profit. Right now it's not for-profit, and then people find a way to take money out through an infra company, content company, etc.
Yeah.
Let's make it legit for universities.
So destigmatize the idea of for-profit for education.
Absolutely. And especially for higher education, it's a no-brainer. I mean, you've seen it in the case of Brazil. There are higher education companies that have more than 1 million students. They've scaled up the university system. So that's one. Two is, I think we need a better quality marker. NIRF is not enough. I think universities should be forced to disclose their placement data, the acceptance data, all the data about the students they get in and the graduation, the outcomes, because often that's the basis on which parents will make decisions. We've seen it with engineering colleges. The worst ones had to shut down. So for the market to work well, you can't have information asymmetry. So that's a second one. And I think a third one, for more research universities like Ashoka, we just need more collaborative platforms. I don't think anybody can do it alone. Some people can, like the Ambanis or Shiv Nadar. But I think more collaborative platforms come together. And I'm seeing that happen. We'll have 40, 50 Ashoka-type universities in the next decade.
In the next decade, 40, 50 Ashoka-type universities?
I think so.
Well, that does deserve a round of applause, because it is a huge supply mismatch at this point in time, and we're seeing Indian students actually having to go outside of India to be able to access quality education, higher education. Vineet Rai, you've been doing this for over 2 decades now, the idea of bridging some of these inequities. Assets under management across the Aavishkaar Group of about 8,000 crores plus at this point in time. Where do you believe the problem still lies? What do you believe needs to be done to really unleash entrepreneurship for the development sector?
So let me actually just phrase, 2030 is just a few years away. Sustainable Development Goals came into being 2015. A world without hunger, poverty, inequity. Brilliant thought process. It's never happened since the time Homo sapiens walking straight. So great vision from the countries. Now, to make it happen, you require $2.5 trillion a year investment for the last 15 years. We lost everything during COVID. So India itself requires close to $1 trillion investment. Close to $1 trillion investment in case we have to change. Total impact investing, despite all our struggle, everything impact investing was born in this country. This country remains the model. I think we are talking about few hundred billions. That's where we have reached. Globally, impact investing is close to $1 trillion. I think what we have done very well in impact investing is we have convinced at least the foreigners that there is something called impact investing, and they have started allocating large amounts of capital. We are still struggling to convince Indians to participate in the venture industry. Impact investing is going to be a step from there. The good thing that has happened in India is that venture industry and impact investing has actually come together, partly because some of the largest enterprises are going to happen in agriculture, water, health, education, financial inclusion. And that's exactly where the new ideas and new innovation. I'm coming from startup Markham, and the amount of people who, the footfall that we saw in agri-tech was seen to be believed, actually, where you have AI, SaaS, and gaming competing against agri-tech for footfall. So.
Well, that certainly is impact. We will have to see how this actually plays itself out. But you're right that we do have startups now focusing on India's specific problems and trying to look for Indian ways of being able to address some of those, including what you've been able to do, Shuchin, with your chain of hospitals. Now, explain to me what you've done differently so that you can make quality private healthcare accessible and affordable, and how do we scale that model?
Thank you, Shirin. As we sit here speaking about billions and trillions of dollars, and we were together at an event recently at Davos where the head of a large multinational bank actually mixed up her billions and trillions and said, no, I don't really meant trillion, I meant billion. No, it was trillions. So when we sit here speaking of that, a silent majority seems to slip through all safety nets. In India, we are speaking about more than 500 million people who have no access to emergency, tertiary, quality healthcare. And in healthcare, the issue is that the inequalities are not just because of the financial reasons that we speak of at these panels, right? The inequalities go way beyond that. Geographical reasons are one of the top reasons, right? Metropolitan cities, the 9 metros of India have a population of what, around 12, 13 crores. If we take the state capitals as well, another 20 crores. So more than 100 crores are staying out of these cities, and they have less than 5% of all super specialty healthcare available. So even if you are a 100 crore net worth individual in a small town like Sitarganj where we work, if you have a heart attack and we were not there at that moment of time, there's no saving you. Those 100 crores cannot save you. So we understand that the real need is in these small towns, but also poor physical outcomes are just a small part of the outcomes in all. Poor financial outcomes are real, and they are there for everybody to see. More than 40% of all Indians, and it is difficult to understand sitting in this hall, more than 40% of all Indians have to either borrow or sell some asset
just
every hospitalization. Every time they're hospitalized, they will borrow. And more than 25% of them slip below the poverty line at each hospitalization. That is more than 6 crore people every year. So providing low-cost, high-quality healthcare is something that we have excelled in. We have now 22 of these hospitals. The setup costs are low. We apply the Pareto principle ruthlessly. We understand that at 20% cost, we can deliver 80% of the infrastructure, 80% of the outcomes, 80% of whatever is needed in that healthcare region. So this is what we've been doing. And I think it is real. I think it's very doable. We've proved it to the world. We've proven the model.
Yes, 22 hospitals up and running across India, across North India. At this point in time, Ashish said 40 to 50 Ashoka universities over the next 10 decades. How many hospitals are you going to be setting up over the next decade?
We shouldn't be less than Ashish. So 50 is the number we should go with as well.